Hi, I'm Heidi Otway, your host for this Conversation on Cannabis virtual forum, brought to you by the Medical Marijuana Education and Research Initiative at Florida A&M University. In this conversation, we're talking about marijuana in the workplace. So let's learn and talk about this subject with our guest, attorney Camilla Perry, who is a partner in the Perry Law Group based in Central Florida, and she's a subject matter expert on the state's labor and employment laws. Ms. Perry, you have a very impressive resume, so tell the audience a little bit more about your experience.
Good morning. Thank you, Heidi, and thank you for having me. I am an attorney here in Orlando and Tampa. I have an office in Tampa also. I am a partner with the Perry Law Group. I have been practicing law for about 19 years now, specializing in labor and employment laws. Most of my practice is representing employers and employees, work through labor laws and employment laws, and I really specialize in training employers to make sure that they're complying with the laws and that they stay out of trouble, and counseling employees to make sure that they know their employment rights. So that's my specialty. I'm also the executive director and general counsel for the state attorney's office for the 9th Judicial Circuit, which is Orange and Osceola County, under the Honorable Monique Roel. And in that capacity, I am the general counsel over really all administrative matters, including employment matters.
Wonderful. Well, we know that you have a lot of good information to share with our audience today. And I want to let everyone know that's joining this live forum to please post, share, and tag your friends on Facebook to have them join this conversation live with us right now. During the forum, we want you to send your questions to Ms. Perry by posting them in the comment box, and we'll do our best to share them with her, or the MMERI team will answer them for you in the Facebook comments. We also want you to tell us what you think about this forum by completing the survey that we're going to post in the comment box during the program. And when you complete the survey, your name will be entered into a drawing for tickets to an iHeart Music event, courtesy of our partners at iHeartMedia. So now let's kind of dive into our conversation about marijuana in the workplace. Attorney Perry, can you provide an overview of Florida's laws related to marijuana in the workplace?
Sure. Well, in 2014, there was a law enacted called the Charlotte's Web Act, and that was for compassionate medical cannabis use. And that was really directed to the terminally ill only. Mm-hmm. But then in 2016, the Constitution was amended by Florida voters to allow medical marijuana to be used by a wider group of people. So the legislation for the legislature passed the statute in 2019 with the definitions of what medical marijuana was, the requirements for use, sale, distribution of it. And it also set forth specifically that the law would not require employers to accommodate medical marijuana in the workplace. Mm-hmm. So it specifically set out the rules for medical marijuana use for employees and employers, and does not allow that to be accommodated.
Yeah, well, you talked about legislation, and we actually got a question from one of our registrants who is watching today's program, and his name is Kevin, and he asked, how can we get the state legislators to change the Florida employment laws to give medical marijuana patients more protection from employers? So can you talk a little bit about legislation that's been filed in this, the 2021 session?
Sure. So right now, there have been 2 bills proposed to allow public employees to be protected from these laws, so that if they are drug tested and they come back positive that they have marijuana in their systems, they can show their medical marijuana card and perhaps be spared from being terminated. That's before the House right now and the Senate. However, that only protects public employees. That is employees who work for the government. It does not apply to private employers. So private employers still have the right to not allow medical marijuana use in their workplace. There is some legislation that has been put forth to protect the private sector, but it did not pass during the last session. We may see that again put forward in this session, but we have not. There also currently is legislation put forward to legalize marijuana just in general for everybody.
Right, right.
Just the workplace. And that has been a push for a while now. And I think that the legislature is kind of trying to chip away at how to make that happen without infringing on the rights upon, for example, employers to have impaired workers in the workplace. How do you balance those two? And I think that's what everyone is trying to figure out.
Right. So to our audience that's listening, just to clarify, medical marijuana is legal in the state of Florida. And you can go to the Florida Department of Health's Office of Medical Marijuana Use to learn how to get a medical marijuana ID card so that you can access cannabis for medicinal purposes. But recreational adult use marijuana is illegal in Florida. So we're going to talk a little bit about that also as it relates to the workplace. Attorney Perry, we got a couple of questions from people asking about disclosures. And one of the questions is, should a job seeker disclose to a prospective employer that he uses medical marijuana, even if a drug test isn't a condition of employment? How would you advise that?
Sure. So the statute also specifically says that an employee cannot use medical marijuana unless permitted by the employer. So it will be very important for the employee to find out whether or not the employer has a drug-free workplace policy. Mm-hmm. And if they do have a drug-free workplace policy, that means that they probably are drug testing randomly. So if they are found to have THC in their system, they can be terminated and they won't have a remedy. Now, if you're working for an employer who does not have a drug-free workplace policy and they do not have drug testing, then you, by statute, are supposed to inform your employer, but at the same time, how would they be able to determine whether or not you are using medical marijuana? Some people use medical marijuana like Tylenol. It really doesn't impair them. It just helps them manage pain. So it wouldn't alter your ability to do your job. So if they don't have a free drug place policy, I don't think you would be in terrible danger if you don't disclose it. But the statute does say that you should have your employer's permission if you are going to use medical marijuana.
Okay. So if it does you talked about someone may have to take a drug test and they fail the drug test, and if they fail the drug test and they're fired, do they have any legal recourse in Florida if they have the medical marijuana card?
Unfortunately not. They don't have any recourse because the medical marijuana card really only allows you to possess medical marijuana without being criminally charged for it. Everything else is kind of off the table. Marijuana is still illegal under federal law. It's still illegal in Florida for recreational use. And the statute does not require any employers to allow you to work while impaired. So right now, there is no recourse. Now, that is what the legislature is looking at changing. But as of right now, the law is no recourse.
Okay, so we talked about medical marijuana. We also talked about adult use recreational marijuana, which is illegal in Florida and at the federal level. What about CBD products?
So that's an interesting question because CBD there are two components to marijuana. There's CBD, which is the non-psychoactive component, and then there's THC, which is the psychoactive component, that's the part that gets you high.
Right.
CBD doesn't get you high. The THC does get you high, but the THC is what is used in the medical marijuana prescriptions. And there is no maximum to how much THC medical marijuana can contain. So it's possible that you would have a very high potency of THC in a medical marijuana prescription and that an employee is consuming every day. There's no way to know. So, CBD is it's legal because there's no THC in it. So it's a different question.
Yeah. Now, some of the dispensaries sell CBD products, and then you can also find it in a convenience store on the corner right there next to the register. Yeah. So in both instances, what you just shared reflects over the counter as well as what you get from a dispensary?
Yes, you can get CBD over the counter and from a dispensary, but you can also get THC from the dispensary, which is what everybody wants. They want the stuff that will help you feel better.
Right. And that's the stuff you need to register with the state of Florida and get, have a qualifying condition.
Yes.
To get that. So again, we just really encourage people to go to the Office of Medical Marijuana Use at the Florida Department of Health to find out what the qualifying conditions are and the steps you can take to get a medical marijuana card in Florida.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about from the employer perspective. And in your experience and what you're seeing, are you seeing employers relax their attitudes or change their attitudes about marijuana, whether it's recreational or medical use?
Well, that's kind of complicated because right now, Florida employers have an incentive to create a drug-free workplace. They get discounts on insurance premiums for workers' compensation and employer liability insurance policies. They can get a big discount on those premiums if they maintain a drug-free workplace. So if an employer was to decide that they wanted to, be a little compassionate and allow some medical marijuana use, they would miss out on those premiums. They would lose money. And if there was an accident involving some medical marijuana use, they wouldn't be reimbursed for it. So the law really does not incentivize allowing medical marijuana in the workplace. In fact, it decentivizes it because you may lose out on some other benefits. So the attitude may be changing socially with respect to medical marijuana use, and people are becoming more aware of how it helps so many people and how so many people may even be more productive employees with the use of medical marijuana. But the liability is still great because you have, you never know what the impact will be on any particular employee at any particular time. And that is what the employer is going to have to balance.
Right, right. And we actually got a question from someone asking, can a medical patient be fired for off-duty drug use? A medical marijuana patient. So you see the question there from Mr. Robinson.
Yes, they absolutely can. If your employee has a drug-free workplace policy and it's zero tolerance, you can be fired for off-duty drug use if you're tested and it comes up in your system. You have to remember, Florida is an at-will employment state, so an employer can fire an employee for any reason whatsoever, as long as it's not protected by law. Medical marijuana use is not protected right now on duty or off duty. So if an employer has a policy that says you cannot take any form of drugs, legal or illegal, and they fire you for it, then unfortunately the employee has no remedy at law.
Wow. Well, we got a really in-depth question from someone who registered to attend the program today. Her name is Carmen, and I'm going to read it to you. She says, an employee has a medical marijuana card and had used products during non-work hours. So this is like a follow-up to what you just talked about. During work hours, the employee was involved in a workplace accident that resulted in injuries and property damage. The employee was subsequently directed to provide a biological sample post-incident. The sample indicated the presence of THC and its degradants, so breakdown products. What are some of the possible outcomes that may adversely impact the employee?
So if they have a medical marijuana card, maybe they weren't smoking or using the marijuana while at work, but they were in an accident at work.
Non-work hours, yeah.
Okay. And they were in an accident at work.
Yes.
The employer absolutely can drug test, because if they are an employer that has a drug-free workplace policy, part of that requirement under Florida law in order to get those insurance benefits is to have a drug testing policy. Right. And one of those is to drug test when there is an accident.
Yeah, they said they tested the employee. So
yes, so if they're testing because they have to, because they have a drug-free workplace policy and she is under the influence, then they can absolutely fire her.
Okay, so that's the consequence. That's the possible outcome for that employee, is that they could lose their job.
Yes, absolutely. And that is what the legislature again is trying to fix, because that seems inequitable. And there's no telling that the use of medical marijuana had anything to do with the accident. And another employee may have had the same accident and may not be fired because they could explain away why it happened. I took my eyes off the road. I sneezed. Anything could have caused the accident, and they may not be terminated.
Right. So speaking of, you mentioned driving and doing things in the workplace. What industries, or are there any industries that forbid the use of medical marijuana by their employees? Sure.
Well, right now, any employer that receives federal funds, or they're a federal contractor, they have to comply with the Federal Drug-Free Workplace Act. And that includes public schools, that includes, any contractors that get federal money. Any employees that work for them have to have a drug-free workplace in order to continue to get those funds. So they will have to require the employees not to have any medical marijuana while on the premises and not to be using medical marijuana. Now, the Federal Drug-Free Workplace Act does not speak to off-duty use of medical marijuana or recreational marijuana. So there may be a little bit more leeway there, but in terms of what industries do not allow medical marijuana use, it's absolutely those industries that are federal contractors.
Wow. Okay. So let's follow up. Nipa, do we have any questions from any of our guests that are watching live that we want to get to? Not at the moment. Okay, thank you. I'm talking to our technical director. So let's talk a little bit more about if someone is applying for a job, can they be denied employment if they have a medical marijuana card? You know, they disclose that, or if they have a if they've had a conviction for marijuana.
It really depends on the employer. If the employer is one that does not drug test, does not have a policy at all, then you may very well be able to obtain employment, and it's not a problem. It's almost like a they don't ask, you don't tell situation. But if they ask you if you are using medical marijuana, you have to disclose it, or you are in danger of being terminated. So you could be denied employment if the employer is one that requires a drug-free workplace, and you tell them that you're using medical marijuana. They can say, I'm sorry, I can't hire you, and that would be it. And they may be needing to comply with the Federal Drug-Free Workplace Act or the Florida Drug-Free Workplace Act in order to keep their benefits under those statutes. A lot of employers don't necessarily want to not hire good employees, because a lot of them realize that a lot of employees really are productive, responsible users, and they want to have compassion, and they really want to, make the best of things. So it really depends on that employer's goals. And there's a lot of liability that comes with medical marijuana use in the workplace. So they really have to balance their desire to engage in that analysis to see if that employee would be a safe, responsible user or not, and whether or not that would impact the bottom line of their businesses.
Yeah. When we, throughout this conversation, we've really been encouraging our viewers and listeners to go to the Florida Department of Health to learn more about how to obtain a medical marijuana card. But in your work as an employer rules and regulations of their workplace, what resources should they look to kind of help them with their policies and procedures, especially if they're a private industry? What are some resources that they could look at?
My favorite resource is SHRM. They are very good in terms of practical policies and helping you accomplish what you want to accomplish depending on your workforce. I would say that it's important for employers to really take a look at what they need to protect. If they have an industry that really is, not a danger to society, does not come into contact with the public a lot, does not deal with transportation or heavy machinery, things like that, then they really could consider having a medical marijuana policy in place. And all they would need to do is really mirror the process that employers go through when they want to accommodate a medical illness under the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so they under the Americans with Disabilities Act, an employer has to accommodate anyone with a physical condition that qualifies. Right now, medical marijuana use under the ADA is not actionable. It's not, you're not protected under the ADA because under federal law, medical marijuana has no recognized current medical use. So there's no, the same situation. There's no protection under the ADA for medical marijuana disabilities. But that doesn't mean that the employer cannot still accommodate if they want to. It just means that if they don't accommodate, they won't be held liable. But an employer can still accommodate if they want to, have a workforce and people that they may want to hire, even though they're using medical marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
So they would first ask the employee what the needs are. Why do they need the medical marijuana? What do they, what is the purpose of the use? Is it pain? Is it stress? Is it focus? Is it, what is it? And do you need to use it while you're at work? Do you need to use it only when you're off duty at home? Do you only need to use it intermittently when you have symptoms that pop up? What is the accommodation? And then they would weigh that need against the potential hardship that it would cause the employer. So in the instance where we have maybe a receptionist who needs medical marijuana and it helps her focus, it may make her a better employee. So the employer may say, okay, I will accommodate your use, and you can answer the phones and you can take breaks and use your medical marijuana. But that doesn't protect you if your performance fails. So the employer could say, look, I will allow this for a certain amount of time, but if I see that your performance is declining, then I could terminate, not based on your medical marijuana use, but based on your performance.
Yeah, yeah. I want to go back to your resource that you offered from the Society of Human Relations Managers. They have a really good tool on their website, and it's they actually have a whole section on their website around marijuana. And each year, it seems like they update what the rules are for employees based on what's happening at the national employers at the national level. And more recently, they've posted an article called Marijuana in the Workplace. It's Complicated, and which is a lot of what you've been sharing with our listeners, that it is very complicated. So I would encourage, employers to go there, and employees as well, just to learn a little bit more about what their rights are.
Right.
We do have a question from one of our Josephine, who is watching right now. She asked, with the spike in unemployment due to the pandemic, should people have to choose between their health and their jobs? And actually, we got a similar question from someone who also called in and said, they feel like they're being discriminated because they have a health issue, but they want to work. But they need their medical marijuana so they can work. So what is your thoughts on that comment and question?
Unfortunately, you really just have to find an employer who is going to be compassionate to your needs. I mean, it really is. You're really at the mercy of the employer. And some employers don't have a choice if they have to comply with the federal laws and the state laws in terms of being a federal contractor or a drug-free workplace. There are, laws that you could try to utilize that don't necessarily involve your medical marijuana use, but your medical condition. So for instance, under the Family and Medical Leave Act, if you have a serious health medical condition and you need time to take care of yourself, you can get 12 weeks leave to maybe, figure out what you need to do, to figure out how to manage your pain and still keep your job. So things like that are still available for all employees, irrespective of their medical marijuana use. But you just have to kind of be creative and kind of talk to your employer and see what they're willing to do and if they're willing to work with you.
Yeah. Ms. Perry, we've also, in the course of our conversations, gotten a lot of comments from people saying, you could be on opioids and go to work.
Yeah.
But for medical marijuana, which has a different effect, but also can ease symptoms for some people, they find that to be unfair.
Yeah. I agree. I agree that it is unfair. And I think a lot of our elected officials think that it's unfair as well. And I think they are really working and try to figure out how to rectify that inequity. But opioids are still illegal if they're not prescribed.
Right.
So it's kind of still the same issue. If you're caught with opioids without a prescription, you can still be charged. You can still be fired for illegal use of narcotics. It's still a level 1 narcotic under the Controlled Substances Act, the federal act. So I really think the issue is going to be twofold. One, the revenues that legal marijuana would bring to the state is about $2 billion.
Right.
So there is a huge incentive there for the legislature really to figure this out, to figure out a way to balance the needs of our medically our employees that are medically ill and need a little help. And the way that society is going right now in terms of legalizing marijuana anyway. So I think that there's going to be a big shift, and I think it's going to be soon, because really at the pace we're going right now, and the more people who are realizing that medical marijuana can really help them, that's going to be a large portion of the workforce. And if all those people are excluded from a lot of jobs, we're not going to have a workforce. So there's going to have to be some compromise between the use of medical marijuana and the rights of employers to have employees that are not impaired.
Yeah. Last year, during the pandemic, 2020, Florida saw a spike in the number of people getting medical marijuana ID cards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So I think we have a couple of questions from our viewers. Let's see what we got. Nipa, what do we have? Can you share something? So, this is a good one. Can you hold a concealed weapon firearm license and a medical marijuana license at the same time?
That I don't know. That's a good question. I know that in order to get a medical marijuana license, you have to be certified by your physician, and then you have to register in a database so that law enforcement knows that you are able to have the medical marijuana license. I don't know the consequence of also having a concealed weapons permit. I do know that, and this is a good question because it also brings up another good point. A lot of people feel like if they have a medical marijuana card that they are immune from criminal liability if they're caught with marijuana, and that's not true. You really have to make sure you understand what the law says. Like, for instance, you have to have your medical marijuana in its original packaging. If you're pulled over by law enforcement and you have a bag of recreational weed, all bets are off. That's not necessarily what the law currently is designed to protect. So you have to have the marijuana in its original medical marijuana packaging, and you have to show your ID card. If you refuse to show your ID card, then that's in and of itself can get you arrested. And if you say you're on the medical marijuana list, you have a card but you just don't have it, and you tell a lie, that's also a criminal act. Wow. And law enforcement knows if you're on the list or not because they have access to it in their cars. So medical marijuana is still not an absolute protection from criminal liability. You have to know what your rights are. It really only protects you from being arrested if you have possessions of medical marijuana and you're found using it. Then that's the only protection. But it doesn't protect you from being arrested if you're under the influence of medical marijuana and you're driving, because that's still a driving under the influence charge, and you can be arrested even if you have a medical marijuana card.
Interesting. So for that particular question, we're going to post some information in the comment box from the MMERI team to get that question answered for you, because I've seen a lot of different messages around that, and there's a lot of misinformation on whether or not you can have a concealed weapons permit and a medical marijuana card. So we'll definitely post that. So we got another question. So what are the disabilities that employers can accommodate for, from Angela? And that would be accommodate for medical marijuana. I'm assuming that's what Angela's question is. Or,
well,
Ms. Perry, you want to answer that?
It's a little bit of a different question, because an employer can accommodate for any disability that meets the statutory definition, and that is any disability that substantially limits a major life activity. So it really is a broad range of illnesses that can be accommodated. I mean, that is a broken leg, and you can go from that to cancer, epilepsy, anything that has a major impact on your ability to operate every day. Your employer can accommodate that, and that wouldn't have anything to do with the medical marijuana use. It's just that one of the accommodations does not have to be letting you use medical marijuana. For instance, if you have epilepsy and you have to, I don't know, take more breaks during the day than other employees for whatever reason, that can be an accommodation, and they can allow you to do that. But if you have epilepsy and your accommodation is, I need to be able to go outside and smoke medical marijuana every 15 minutes, they don't have to accommodate that. So that's all that really means.
So we got a question from someone asking, And it says there are laws in some states that protect patients by allowing the patient to form a testing facility of medical marijuana use, and the testing facility can change the positive THC result to a negative THC result. Is that being considered in Florida? Do you know?
I have not heard that, and I think that that is peculiar because I don't know why, what would be the impetus to change a positive result to a negative result. In Florida, there's no maximum or minimum amount of THC that can be used for medical marijuana, so it wouldn't be a necessity to change it to any amount or no amount at all. So I have not heard of anything like that, and I think that if the law is going to be changed to protect patients, it's going to be changed so that an employer has an express duty not to immediately terminate or suspend or discipline someone for medical marijuana use. That if someone is using medical marijuana in the workplace, that's not the end of the story. That they will be able to say, hey, I have an illness, I have a medical marijuana card, it has not altered my ability to do my job, this is what I need it for, this is when I use it, and I think that you should be able to accommodate me. New laws are going to give the employees that ability to really just kind of explain to the employer what's going on, as opposed to just being immediately fired, no questions asked, because of that marijuana in their system.
Yeah, that's a good, that was an interesting question. So thank you for answering that. So Attorney Perry, as we, get ready to kind of close a little bit here with our conversation, is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you want to share with our viewers and listeners today? And we'll probably get a couple more questions, but is there anything that we didn't cover that you want to make sure people know about? I know you had some, you had some really good tips that you shared with everyone. If you want to do a recap or anything else that our listeners and viewers need to know.
Sure. Well, I really think that definitely it's important for everyone to know that the new statute on medical marijuana use really does not offer any protections for employees to use medical marijuana. It doesn't require the employer to accommodate the use of medical marijuana. It doesn't require the employer to let the employee work while under the influence of medical marijuana. It doesn't require any private party to allow smoking of medical marijuana on their property if they don't want it. It doesn't permit an employee to sue an employer for discrimination or termination because they use medical marijuana. It expressly says that there is no cause of action if you are fired for using medical marijuana. So it really is important for the both the employee to know what their employer's drug policy is, and it's important for employers to determine what their policy is going to be and whether or not they're going to really work hard to try to accommodate their medical marijuana users who may be really, really good workers and people that they need to keep in their workforce, and figure out if it is worth having a policy that permits medical marijuana. I think it's also important for employees to know that they really need to be careful and try to get all the information that they can before deciding to get a medical marijuana card, because if they want to keep their employment, the law is really not on their side. And even though it's not fair at the moment, it is the law. Mm-hmm. So I would hate for an employee to take a chance and say, hey, I'm just going to keep it to myself, I'm not going to tell anybody. And then something happens and you're tested randomly and then you're fired and you really don't want to have anything to say. Yeah. So I think that's probably the most important information that should be out there for everyone to just make sure they know that there aren't any protections right now. So you really have to protect yourself. And the other thing I would say is to lobby your legislators.
Right.
They absolutely have all of the power, and they have the research and the resources to be able to figure out how to best balance medical marijuana and increasing the protections to employees. Several states, as one of the other participants mentioned, have a lot of laws that do protect medical marijuana users. So it is possible, and it is something that I know that a lot of legislators are working on. Carlos Guillermo and Jeff Brandes out of Orlando and Tampa, they're working on legalizing all marijuana for recreational use. Mm-hmm. And then we have two other, I think one in the House and one in the Senate, who have those protections for public workers. So I think it's just a matter of time before we're able to get this right and get the law changed so that medical marijuana makes sense in the workplace and can be safely used.
Yeah. We will post in the comments the bills that have been filed, because lawmakers do want to hear from their constituents. They want to hear from you. They want to hear from Floridians and your whether you support or you have ideas about their legislation. So we would certainly encourage you to get involved in that process if you so desire, because it's your right as a Floridian to do that. So
Absolutely.
I just want to make sure you know that. I have one last question for you. We just had a presidential election. We had a change in the leading party of our country, and I've seen a lot of news stories that we could be seeing more states legalize marijuana. In your experience, expertise, and in the work that you do, what are you hearing about that?
I think
At the federal level, legalization.
at the federal level, I have not heard. I think that is a little different. But I do think that medical marijuana legalization at the state level can still have a huge impact, even if it's still illegal at the federal level, because it gives employers more tools to be able to accommodate their workforce if they're not federal contractors. And most employers are not federal contractors. I mean, some of our biggest ones are, but for the most part, most people don't have any federal contracts and can do whatever they want to do. So it'd be huge if our state were to move forward with legalizing marijuana, and the federal government can follow suit. I hope that they will. I have not heard any grumblings about it really being a true priority. I have not heard that Joe Biden was really interested in pushing that forward. Although, things can change, and that happens all the time. A lot of employers don't drug test. They just don't. And they don't have concerns about having medical marijuana users in the workforce until there's a problem. Right. So I think that it's just really important just to know who your employer is and what they require. And I think there are probably more options out there than people are aware of that they could accommodate a medical marijuana use, particularly where that you can work without being altered and without really posing any liability to your employer.
We got another question when we talk about testing. You just referenced testing. Have you heard of any new developments to better test for impairment with levels?
No, and as a matter of fact,
that's a good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. And with respect to blood testing individuals, I have not heard anything, but I do know that there are not even good tests to test levels of THC in any particular substances. For instance, in 2019, the Florida legislature legalized hemp, and hemp has low levels of THC in it. But it is very difficult for say law enforcement to know whether or not a baggie of marijuana has low levels of THC that is hemp, that is legal, or has too much THC that would take it over the threshold and make it illegal marijuana. So I think that if we're not yet able to test actual marijuana for THC levels to determine if it's legal or illegal, it kind of follows that the methodology to test individuals for levels of THC may not be that great either. But I'm not sure of that. I have not looked into that. I do not know the answer to that particular question. But I know that testing for THC is something that also needs some development.
Okay. Attorney Perry, this was a great conversation. I learned a lot, and I'm sure our viewers and listeners also learned a lot from today's program. And we certainly want to encourage you to check out the Society of Human Relations Professionals Management, SHRM, as it's known, to get information information about cannabis in the workplace. And then also for those who are interested in learning more about obtaining a medical marijuana card in Florida, to please go to the Florida Department of Health Office of Medical Marijuana Use to learn more about that. And Ms. Perry, we want to thank you for being a guest on the program today. This was super enlightening and a lot of information. And if you would like to share your contact information with folks, we would certainly encourage you to do that in the chat box on our Facebook page, so folks can get in contact with you for more information. We also want to encourage everyone to please complete the survey that's going to be posted in the comment box on Facebook. Your name will be entered into a drawing for to attend a music event from our partners at iHeartMedia. And we would love for you to follow us at meri.famu.edu to learn more about the initiative of the medical marijuana research and education initiative at Florida A&M University. We thank you so much for being on the program today. Ms. Perry, thank you so much. We really appreciate you, and hopefully we can have you come back once we get past the legislative session.
Yeah.
See what changes may or may not have been made, have you come back as a guest. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure. Thank you.